I refer to these losses as the 4 major losses of the adoptee, and I firmly believe these losses are at the core of much of the addictive behavior that we see in adopted individuals. Understanding these losses can be difficult, not just for adoptees, but also for their parents, partners, friends, and loved ones. And while adoptees themselves may struggle to confront these realities, it is vital to acknowledge and understand the losses, no matter how uncomfortable. In the last decade, research on relinquishment and the effects of early maternal separation has expanded significantly. I strive to stay up to date with these findings, and much of the next bits of information comes from the growing body of research. So please keep this in mind as we move forward. So the first loss is the loss of historical and genetic identity. This includes medical. For adoptees, this loss or these losses begin with the absence of their origin story, which includes little to no information about their ancestors, biological parents, or genetic lineage, especially if it's a closed adoption. So the loss of medical history alone can mean losing the ability to prevent or prepare for hereditary illnesses, an invisible burden that can follow someone for life. Without access to their biological roots, adoptees often grow up in families and communities where no one physically resembles them. They navigate identity formation without any mirrors. Many describe feeling like an alien in their own life or an imposter in their own story, unseen, unknown, and not as real as other people. Transracial adoptees, in particular, grow up in environments where no one looks like them, and often where racial microaggressions are common and sometimes quite unacknowledged. The result is a profound, isolating sense of otherness that non-adoptees may never fully grasp. The next loss is the loss of trust. All adoptees, and I'll include those who have spent time in foster care, have experienced a major rupture in trust, often more than one. These ruptures can occur before language, before memory, and long before anyone can name them. But they shape everything that comes after, how someone might attach, how someone might protect themselves, how someone experiences safety or doesn't experience it in the world. So even when a child is adopted at birth, their first experience is one of immense attachment rupture, separation from the scent, voice, and rhythm of the person whose body held and sustained them. The heartbeat that they became used to that once cradled them totally disappears. This kind of loss isn't stored in words or images, but in the body itself. It's etched into the limbic system as implicit memory. The child, the baby, may not remember the loss consciously, but they'll feel it through this hypervigilance, this anxiety, and often a deep, inescapable sense of not being safe in the world. For those placed in foster care or orphanages before adoption, the loss often deepens. Without consistent, attuned caregiving, the foundational lessons of trust and safety are never fully written. Or worse, just as a bond begins to form, it's disrupted again through another placement. One rupture becomes 2 and then 3, each one like a silent earthquake reshaping the internal landscape of the child. Attachment is built in the smallest of moments, being held when frightened, fed when hungry, soothed when distressed. But what happens when no one comes, or when cries go unanswered in a busy orphanage? Or when the response is irritation and not care? The child learns a painful rule. Don't need, don't ask, stay quiet to stay close, or maybe even appear easy and likable at all times. The lower brain, the survival brain, it can't tell time. It doesn't know that the trauma is over. As Dr. Bruce Perry says, what was once adaptive has become maladaptive. This helps explain why so many adoptees struggle with intimacy, vulnerability, and trust, and why substances like alcohol or drugs or sex or shopping can feel like a lifeline. They don't just take the edge off, they quiet this alarm. They allow for closeness without panic. They let an adoptee breathe. For adoptees healing from addiction, trust isn't just difficult, it's tender, raw, and reactivated in early sobriety. Loss number 3 is the loss of health. Health here refers not only to the body, but to the entire internal ecosystem: mental, emotional, and physiological health. For many adoptees, that ecosystem is shaped by stress from the very beginning, often before the first breath is even taken. All adoptees carry the imprint of early rupture, but this third loss, the loss of health, is like an underground river, invisible on the surface but shaping everything it touches. It shows up in the nervous system, in the immune system, in the way a heart races without warning, or a stomach tightens in the face of closeness. This is the realm of toxic stress, prolonged or extreme activation of the body's stress response system, especially in the absence of the buffering protection from a consistent and attuned caregiver in the beginning of life. Unlike tolerable stress, which can be soothed and resolved, toxic stress floods the system, and over time it alters the architecture of the brain itself. So I'll repeat what I said in a former slide. Even if a baby is adopted at birth, the severing of the maternal bond, the loss of the voice, rhythm, scent, and heartbeat that they've known in utero is profound. What the baby loses isn't just a person, it's a whole sensory and biological world. That rupture activates the body's stress response system before the infant has tools to regulate it. We've seen this biologically in other mammals. Separate a rat pup from its mother and you'll find measurable, lasting changes in the brain and body. In fact, key biological impacts of maternal separation in animal studies include increased stress hormone levels, epigenetic changes in genes regulating stress and emotion, alterations in brain structure and function, particularly in the amygdala, the alarm center, in the hippocampus, the memory center, in the prefrontal cortex, the reasoning and self-regulation center. Impaired immune functioning, and behavioral disturbances such as anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. Children who experience maternal separation within the first 2 years of life exhibit significantly higher levels of stress and aggressive behaviors by preschool age. The biological embedding of early stress doesn't just shape temperament, it influences long-term mental and physical health outcomes. It's not just about being removed. It's about the absence of co-regulation. A human baby cannot calm themselves. They require thousands of attuned, repetitive interactions. They require being held when afraid, soothed when overwhelmed, fed when hungry. This builds the architecture of trust and resilience. Without it, the nervous system grows wired for survival instead of connection. For infants relinquished at birth, there's no before the trauma. The separation is the starting point. And then there's the mother's stress. No scenario involving relinquishment is low stress for the birth mother. Whether she's facing abuse, poverty, substance use, or the emotional weight of letting go, her stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, they'll cross the placenta. The baby is shaped not only by what happens after birth, but what they absorb in utero. In my clinical work with adoptees, the pattern is clear. Whether the child was separated at birth or placed later after enduring neglect or trauma, their nervous systems often remain on high alert. Hypervigilance becomes the baseline. And many adoptees have compounded stress. Prenatal substance exposure, maltreatment, chaotic placements, these pre-adoptive stressors further prime the body for dysregulation. Adoptees often crave connection and fear it at the same time. The longing for closeness is deep, but the fear that intimacy will lead to loss is also deep. When connection feels like a threat, adoptees may seek out ways to soothe or escape the anxiety it brings. Substances can offer a powerful illusion of safety, muting the inner voice that warns, "Don't trust, don't get too close." In recovery, the task becomes learning how to stay present through the fear, how to build genuine connection without numbing, running, or collapsing under the weight of vulnerability. This last loss is the loss of self-trust. This loss often stems from what we call disenfranchised grief, which is the kind of grief that isn't really validated or supported or even acknowledged by society. For adoptees, it's not just the absence of support, but it's also the presence of a dominant cultural narrative that distorts their experience. This positivity bias functions like a social or societal silencer. When grief is glossed over or denied, the adoptee's losses of identity, culture, language, and family are rendered invisible. It's not just invalidating, it's really disorienting. And it doesn't just happen a few times. Adoptees experience this kind of dismissal over and over and over again across their lifespan. This plays out in subtle and overt ways. Just last week, an adoptee client confided in her longtime primary care doctor about the recent overdose death of her birth mother. The doctor's response: "You were so lucky to be raised by your parents." This is what disenfranchised grief looks like in action. It erodes trust in one's inner world, in the validity of one's feelings, and ultimately in the self. Our culture really has never made space for adoptees to grieve. Contacting me for coaching or trainings or counseling, my information is there.